The Los Angeles Rams have given Matthew Stafford permission to seek a trade, and the Pittsburgh Steelers would be a perfect fit. That and more in today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso, with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, flying solo today. On today's episode, we are going to talk about the NFL Combine kicking off this week, about the Saints and the Jacksonville Jaguars making hires, but we're going to start with the new news on Matthew Stafford. Before we dive in, do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. We got big news over the weekend that the Los Angeles Rams are now giving Matthew Stafford the permission, the freedom to seek a trade and to negotiate with other teams. And my guy Doug McCain from Locked On Rams broke down the big news.
Will Matthew Stafford sign a new contract with the Rams to hopefully retire in the Horns, or will the Rams look to trade him and really rebuild as a franchise that enters a completely new era post-Stafford? Well, the latest today is that the Rams are letting Matthew Stafford's agent talk to other teams to get an idea about his value around the league, to gauge his contract value. Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, he was on Rich Eisen today, and he said, quote, "My understanding has been that the Rams have been in conversations with his agent, that they've also given his agent permission to talk to other clubs just to figure out, hey, if he becomes available, if there were a trade, what were the numbers be elsewhere? What would those numbers look like?" That takes care of multiple things. It takes care of, number one, what Matthew Stafford could get if we get to a trade, because you wouldn't be able to execute a Matthew Stafford trade without having a new deal in place. But also, it gives the Rams an idea and Stafford an idea of, hey, we're going to try to work together. Are we going to be able to work out a contract to keep him in LA?
So to give you a comparison of a situation that's very similar to this, it's the Lamar Jackson situation. Now, people like to get on social media and say, oh, no teams wanted Lamar Jackson. What idiots, blah, blah, blah. And that's just silly. What happened there is the Baltimore Ravens put a tag on Lamar Jackson so that another team would have to negotiate for them. So Matthew Stafford and the Rams can't agree on what his new contract should look like. So it's brilliant for the Los Angeles Rams to say, hey, if we think that you guys think that we're not paying you enough, then go out and find out what other teams will pay you. Oh, other teams will only pay you the same thing that we're willing to pay you? Guess we're not giving you that bad of a deal. Come back. The thing is, if the Rams are too aggressive, they run the risk of basically making Matthew Stafford mad. You know what I mean? So what the Rams want to do is say, hey, if you don't like our offer, go negotiate with other teams. If you find a lot better deal and they agreed to the trade package that we offer, then that's fine. We'll do it. We'll send you wherever you want to go where you're going to get your money. But the Rams probably know, hey, what we're offering you right now is fair. So you can go elsewhere and you can look and try to find more money or try to find a better deal, but you're not going to find it. And then you're going to come back to us, and instead of being angry with us saying that we stiffed you, you're going to know that we gave you a fair market deal. So you're not going to be angry with us going forward. This is actually a brilliant move by the Rams, and I think it actually means that Stafford is more likely to go back to the Rams than to get traded. This is just allowing Matthew Stafford's agent to negotiate his next contract with another team so that the Rams don't have to overpay and also don't have to look like jerks. So this is the same thing the Ravens did in a different way, but it's a similar philosophy, and I think it makes it more likely that Stafford is back with the Rams. But if we're talking about what teams are a good fit for Matthew Stafford, the number one team that pops up to me is the Pittsburgh Steelers. I will continue to come back to this. Number one, if you're Matthew Stafford, you, of course, want to get paid, which sounds like it's his top priority. But at 37, going on 38 years old, you want to have the opportunity to win too. And the Pittsburgh Steelers had a hot streak when they put Russell Wilson in. They were 4-2 with Justin Fields. But after that, it all collapsed because it was built on smoke and mirrors. You get a guy like Matthew Stafford, who went toe-to-toe with the Eagles defense in the playoffs in Philadelphia. You get a guy like Matthew Stafford, you get an immediate upgrade at quarterback. You're talking about a top 10 level quarterback in Matthew Stafford. So with the defense that Pittsburgh has, the talent on that side of the ball, they add some enforcements on an offensive line that showed some improvement last year, but they add more reinforcements there, get another weapon on the outside. I don't think it's too much to ask for the Steelers to be able to help on the offensive line and help at wide receiver. That's really all they have to do to go from, and then you add Matthew Stafford to the mix to go from what they were last year, which is a team that you don't take serious going into the playoff time, to a team that is very, very dangerous. So I think that's a perfect fit for Stafford and for the team as well. And I think Pittsburgh would be willing to pay the money that Stafford wants. And since they don't have a onslaught of needs, they have their own needs, but they don't have a million needs like one of the worst teams in the NFL. You can afford to give up some draft capital to get Matthew Stafford and to pay him. So I think the Steelers are a super clean fit. The New York Giants do make a little bit of sense as well. I think Brian Daboll, they would be willing to pay the price to get Stafford. But the Giants aren't as good of a roster as the Steelers. The Giants are one of the worst teams in the NFL with a coach and a GM who are on the hot seat and could be fired. Why would Matthew Stafford want to go there and sign a long-term deal unless he just truly only wants money? You know what I mean? He doesn't care that he's going to lose. And if that's the case, then there are a ton of other possibilities. The Jets, the Raiders, the Titans, the Saints, any of those terrible football teams. If Matthew Stafford simply wants money, then all of those teams are open to you. But if you want to win and you want a competitive roster, to me, the Steelers make the most sense. Maybe the Minnesota Vikings don't feel confident with J.J. McCarthy's knee right away, and they want to go get Stafford. The problem is you give Stafford a multi-year deal. You got to play J.J. McCarthy in year 3 at minimum to take value of his rookie contract and where you drafted him. So you can't sit him for 3 years like that, not at pick number 10, like, the Packers did at pick number 24. It's just crazy. So maybe the Vikings. Indianapolis is kind of a sleeper to me. I think the Colts could make some sense for Matthew Stafford. Now, where they're at with Anthony Richardson. Richardson had an okay finish to the season. Obviously, overall, it was a bad year for Anthony Richardson and one that has to make you very, very skeptical of him as a franchise quarterback in the NFL going forward. But if the Colts feel like they need to win as many games as possible this year and they can't do it. Last year, the goal for the Colts was, we got to develop Anthony Richardson and see what we have in Anthony Richardson. Well, you can't really do that this year. No, you need to win. You can't just devote an entire year again to Anthony Richardson's development. So if the Colts aren't that certain about Anthony Richardson, but don't quite want to let him go yet, bring in Matthew Stafford, who is a totally different play type, and let him hopefully help Anthony Richardson with some of his weaknesses. You roll with Matthew Stafford. The Colts have a pretty good roster, and maybe that makes them, a playoff contender at that point. So I think Indy would be an option. But again, the Steelers are the best fit for Matthew Stafford. But ultimately, to me, this is just a ploy for the Rams to let another team negotiate Stafford's next contract, and he'll still end up back with Los Angeles. But 2 big hires in the NFL this weekend. We'll go over them. Before we do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off and you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or I'm picking Luka to absolutely destroy the Denver Nuggets, baby. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, The app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, football fans, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Again, flying solo today, the Madman. It's a Madman monologue edition of Locked On NFL. But we talked about the Matthew Stafford news from over the weekend, what I think it really means, but also some suitors there. Now I want to move to some other news that happened over the weekend. Again, getting you up to date on everything that you might have missed here on the Locked On NFL podcast. But we got two big hires in the NFL. The New Orleans Saints hired a defensive coordinator, but we will start with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have finally, just a couple of days before the NFL Combine is set to happen, finally have hired a general manager. James Gladstone came over from the Los Angeles Rams organization. I'll let my guy Tony Wiggins, the barber himself, break down the news for his squad.
Here's my opinion. Good. They went through the process. They found their guy. Everyone thought it was someone else. I had heard it was Ian Cunningham. And then they left room for themselves to be blown away by the process. And I think that's a very, very good thing. You know, you want the process to open up. And then when the team is blown away by that process, and that's one of the things I said, let's just see what happens. So for weeks, people have been asking me, and I mentioned this on the podcast that I posted earlier, folks have been asking me, who you prefer? I say, whoever they come out of that process thinking is the best one, that's who I prefer, because alignment is so important. And where there's no space, there's probably healthy debate and healthy disagreement, but no one has any ulterior motives. There's no space for folks to wonder who's responsible. It's a three-headed monster working underneath Shad. They'll all report to him individually, but I don't think it's going to be an issue because I do believe this is a very, very together process.
So here's what I would say. I don't think that the Jacksonville Jaguars made a bad move here. I think taking James Gladstone, a guy who's been in the Rams organization, who has been incredible at drafting over the last few years. They've built a Super Bowl roster in Los Angeles from a couple of years ago. They've really retooled that roster with guys like Puka Nacua. And, now they got Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, and they had Kobe Turner and Byron Young. They have all these different players. Like, they have been a very, very good draft and develop roster. And that's with highly paid quarterbacks every step of the way, without first round picks that you're trading for big time veterans and things like that. So the Rams have been a very creative organization when it comes to putting things together. You take a guy like Liam Cohen, who's the head coach for Jacksonville now, who came from the Sean McVay tree, who was a Sean McVay assistant before he went to college and then ultimately came back to the NFL with Tampa Bay last year. But you pair Liam Cohen, a guy with Los Angeles Rams philosophy, and you have a GM with Los Angeles Rams philosophy. Like, I get how that makes sense. But to me, one thing that Tony said that I disagree with here is he said, I was going to say good no matter who they picked because they were going to pick the best guy. Like, I was fine. I was going to say no matter what, whoever Jacksonville picked, that was the right guy. I just don't agree with that trust level in Jacksonville as an organization. I think they made the right decision here. I think they made the right hire, but I don't think the reasoning for being happy with the hire is, hey, I trusted Jacksonville's process. So whoever they hired, I was going to be happy with because I trusted Jacksonville is not an organization. And look, I'm not trying to throw stones in a glass house. The Tennessee Titans, who I cover, is a terrible organization. And me and Tony love reminding each other that we're both ugly. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I can't sit here and say, hey, I trust the Tennessee Titans to make the right decisions. Just like you can't look at the Jacksonville Jaguars and say, hey, I'm going to like whatever decision they make because I trust their process. I think Gladstone was the right hire for the reasons that we talked, but that's his Rams history. That is the connective tissue between Liam Cohen and his philosophy and then James Gladstone, where he came from, what the type of players they were looking for and the type of skill sets that they were looking for will fit. But to me, it has nothing to do with the trust in Jacksonville's organization to do the right thing, because we're talking about someone who hired Urban Meyer and took forever to fire their general manager. And it's just like, I just, out of all of the reasons you could say that Jacksonville made a good decision, trusting Jacksonville's process cannot be one of those reasons. That's all I'm saying here. But overall, a good move for Jacksonville. And about time, right? The NFL Combine is this week. We're going to talk about the Combine to end today's show, but little late in the game, this guy's not going to be able to implement his. Here's the thing with scouting. Different teams, it's like offenses or defenses. Different teams have different schemes. They have different grading scales. They have different terminology within their scouting systems that they use. There are different types of scouting systems. Like all I can do is draw off my experience. Like Mike Borgonzi, who the Tennessee Titans just hired as their general manager. He is very familiar and is part of, in Kansas City, a similar scouting system to what's used in Green Bay. And the Titans vice president or president of player operations and president of football is from Green Bay. So there's continuity there with the scouting system. There's no way that James Gladstone is going to be able to implement his scouting system, his grading system, his processes, change people in the front office to be the people he wants to work around him. There's no way he's going to be able to do that and impact this draft cycle for Jacksonville. Like, they've been putting together draft plans for months and months and months, and the Combine is here. There's no way you got hired on Friday and you're going to be able to implement enough change in that process to really flex your muscle the way that Jacksonville wants from a new general manager. So the timing, didn't like that. The process, can't trust, but I do think it was a good hire. You look at the New Orleans Saints, who got a new defensive coordinator, and I'm sorry, but looking at the 2025 New Orleans Saints, looks a lot like the 2023 Los Angeles Chargers.
The New Orleans Saints finally have their new defensive coordinator, and I'll be honest, I love the hire. I'm Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast. The New Orleans Saints have hired Brandon Staley, former Los Angeles Chargers head coach, most recently the former assistant head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, as their next defensive coordinator. He was a fantastic defensive coordinator back in 2020 with the Los Angeles Rams with a star-studded defense there, however. But I get a lot of question marks about this. Is this going to work for the New Orleans Saints? And to be real, we don't know. We're going to have to wait and see if this does work. But here's why I love this hire. I'd rather watch any NFL team out there fail because they tried something new rather than fail because they did the same thing that has failed them in the past. The New Orleans Saints defense in the recent past has not been what its reputation has been developed to be. So why continue to try to do the same thing instead? At the very least, this offers the New Orleans Saints and their fans a new path forward on defense.
Okay, so I understand what Ross is saying there. It's new for the Saints. You know what I mean? But it's not new at all. The 2023 Los Angeles Chargers had Brandon Staley as their head coach and Kellen Moore as their offensive coordinator. Like, that is not a new pairing. That is not a fresh take. The Saints are literally recycling the coaching staff and the brain trust on that coaching staff. Really, obviously, the roles are flipped. But in 2023, the Los Angeles Chargers went 5-12 with Kellen Moore and with Brandon Staley. Yeah, Kellen Moore is now the head coach, and you know, Brandon Staley is the defensive coordinator. They've switched from coordinator to head coach, but it's the same two guys in the mix leading the offense and the defense. It's the same exact guys, and they went 5-12. And then immediately the next season, Jim Harbaugh comes in with what people think was a worse roster. Jim Harbaugh let the roster get worse. And they didn't add anything at wide receiver. Like, they had Ladd McConkey in the draft, but like, the roster for the Chargers this year was not significantly better than the roster that the Chargers had in 2023. And yet the Chargers were a playoff team this year, and they went 5-12 with Brandon Staley and Kellen Moore calling the shots. So yes, this is new for the Saints, but this is a beat up 2000 Honda Civic. This isn't a one owner car that was made 3 years ago. This is not new. This is not fresh. We've seen this fail before. And now the Saints right now are far worse as a roster than the 2023 Chargers were, with Justin Herbert at quarterback and an all-pro left tackle and good pieces on defense. So you're taking two coaches that were terrible together 2 years ago, putting them on a worse team. I'm sorry. I have a hard time getting excited for this season of New Orleans Saints football. Maybe in the future, Kellen Moore can build something, but with Derek Carr at quarterback and their other options at quarterback if they move on and where their roster is and the coaching staff. It's like the Cowboys we talked about last week. A lot of blah. Very, very boring team, in my personal opinion. So they made the hire, but I can't say I'm a big fan of the situation that they got going in New Orleans. All right, football fans, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We've talked about the Matthew Stafford news, hit the two big hires that happened in the NFL over the weekend, and my thoughts on those. Now, I want to look forward because the NFL Combine kicks off on Tuesday. It's a staggered schedule. There's media availability with coaches and players and things like that, and then the workouts and the measurements and the interviews between the teams and the players, not the media and the players and the coaches. So much happens throughout the week. The Combine is going to go into next week as well because of how it's staggered. They do certain positions on certain days and different stages. So one day, certain positions will do their interviews. The next day, certain positions will do their measurements and their medicals. The next day, they'll do their on-field workouts, and they have it staggered for all the different positions and things like that, as I'm certain a lot of you guys know. But when looking at this year's Combine, to me, it all comes down to which of the quarterbacks are going to throw, who's going to show up out of the quarterback group. It may be a quote-unquote bad quarterback group, but there's still a ton of interest with the top two guys, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, and my guy Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez from Locked On NFL Draft. Great time to get subscribed to that, my friends, and make it your second listen. They talked about looking at the quarterback position through the Combine lens.
Who's going to duck the smoke when I think about the quarterbacks? Because it's every year somebody doesn't throw. And it's like, hey, if you're healthy, throw, right? Like we've seen, crazy enough, we've seen that think about the goal ball drill at the Combine for the quarterbacks, how that gets guys drafted. Josh Allen went out there and wowed everybody. Remember, was it 2 years ago? We had the duel between C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardson. Had the like I was in the building, had just having people buzzing. People were excited about that. I want to see Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. And those two are cousins, but the way that they talk and compete, you would think they were like literally brothers, and that's how they operate. That type of competitiveness that they have with their training with QB Select, their QB coach, bring that to the Combine. Go throw for throw, go back for back to back, and just go out there and light it up.
And you know what? Shedeur Sanders officially announced on Sunday that he's not throwing at the Combine after not practicing at the Shrine Bowl. Now, look, my opinion on whether quarterbacks should throw at the Combine or not is a bit nuanced, quite frankly. It's a bit complicated, and that's life. But I think that it depends on who you are. I know, isn't that crazy? It depends on your situation. Now, when I look at a Shedeur Sanders and I look at a Cam Ward, right now the conversation is that this quarterback class is not that great. Okay, it's not a great QB class, and that includes Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Now, some people think that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are worthy of the top picks in the draft, and it's just a normal quarterback year. Some out there think that Cam Ward would have been quarterback 6 or 7 last year, and Shedeur Sanders should be a mid-first to an early second-round pick, and they should not be top 5 guys. I have seen more people saying that they should not be that high than I've seen people saying they should be that high. But either way, my point is, I don't think that the consensus on Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders is solidified enough for them to pass on throwing. I think in previous years, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, not Drake May, I wouldn't put in that category, but Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young. C.J. Stroud ended up throwing anyway, though, against Anthony Richardson, as my guy Damian mentioned in there. So to me, it's all about how good your college situation was and what the view of you going into the draft is. Now, let me say this. I am basing that off the public conversation around Shedeur Sanders. There are some people who think that Shedeur Sanders has been promised that, hey, this is your floor. We're going to pick you if you're here. And if, let's say, the New York Giants told Shedeur Sanders, if you're there at 3, we're going to pick you. Why would he throw at the Combine? To risk getting hurt, to risk doing something stupid, to risk looking bad? Why would he do that? But at the same time, it doesn't seem like a lot of people out there are convinced on this QB class. So with that in mind, if I haven't solidified my status, then I need to take every opportunity I can to drive it home. So I personally think that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, different than Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels last year, I think those guys did enough in college to where they shouldn't have thrown. I don't think that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders have done enough in college to not throw. And I think if you look at the questions with both of those guys, I think it's worse for Shedeur Sanders because one of the big questions for him is his arm. Is his arm talent, his velocity, his ability to push the ball down the field. So I think with that being a concern and with the general uncertainty about the quarterback position this year, I think it would have been wise for Shedeur Sanders to throw. We haven't heard exactly on Cam Ward. That information may be out by the time that you hear this on Monday afternoon. But we don't know right now. Hopefully Cam Ward does throw. I would be less, I guess it makes more sense to me for Cam Ward not to throw, who I think is clearly a better prospect on tape, than it is for Shedeur Sanders not to throw. But, you know, there could be teams, again, the tape is what matters most. Let me use this as a bridge to my final point of the show, of the solo madman trip. The combine is about comparison, not creation. Okay? The film, the tape, the football is how you create your evaluation of a player. Your evaluation of a player should start and end with the film because the football is what matters most. What you use the combine for is with the drills. You use it as a measurement comparison. It's not, oh, this guy had a slow 40-yard dash, so he can't be good. It's, hey, historically speaking, players who have run this slow a 40-yard dash at the combine, combined with playing in this conference, combined with having this wingspan, those players with all three of those have not turned into NFL starting caliber players. It's about historical data, not, hey, this one drill of this one player at this combine means this about his draft stock. It's about comparing statistical evidence to previous draft classes and trying to create patterns. Hey, quarterbacks who didn't play at Power 5 programs, who have a hand size of under this much, have 89% of the time not been a quality draft pick. All it is about comparing historical data. And then the meetings, to me, the meetings aren't, hey, I don't know if I want a quarterback or an edge or whatever. I'm going to have a meeting or let's do it this way. I have the edge rusher, number one. He's the best player in the draft. So I think I'm going to take the edge rusher, but I might take a quarterback. I have the quarterback ranked 10th and 15th in this draft, but I go and have a meeting with the quarterback. The meeting really, really impresses me. Now I feel more confident with the quarterback. I'll take him number one. I think that's a mistake. Now you're getting away from the film and being sold by your emotions from a conversation. So to me, it's more likely that we have these two. We want to take a quarterback number one. We have these two quarterbacks very similarly ranked. Which guy is better in the meetings? That breaks the tie. So the meetings are a tiebreaker, but they aren't the evaluation. So to me, the combine is all about supplementing your evaluation based on film. It's not the entire evaluation. Nothing on its own that can happen in the combine other than injury or an off-field problem at the combine. Nothing like that should overly shake your current evaluations of the players. It should only confirm or cancel out things that you previously thought. You have preconceived notions, and you go in and you either check the box or you say, I was wrong about that preconceived notion. That's all that it is. So, no Shedeur Sanders at the combine. Hopefully we still get Cam Ward. There's some mid-round quarterbacks that are going to be interesting. But we'll probably have some more combine talk on the show this week. But that is going to do it for me today. I am your host, the Madman. Thanks for tuning in to Locked On NFL. And as I tell you every episode, stay safe out there.